The Newsagents.
It's Friday, and it's a special Q&A. Do you think we should have a music bed for that, or not?
What, with this production on this show? I wouldn't have thought so, John.
You'd be lucky if you got a symbol or a triangle, quite frankly.
A little ding of a triangle.
I'd like that.
Yeah.
I'll be in charge.
5 seconds in and already an attack on the production team.
From you.
From me, yes.
So our first question today is from Lauren. And she says that, well, I'll just read this. Loving the pod as always. Your coverage of the Labour conference this week has been fantastic. My question leads on from your interview at the conference with Tom Baldwin. He explained that Keir Starmer is angry about his wife being dragged into this. His wife had never asked to be involved in politics, as it has been reported amid Donorgate that a Labour donor bought more than £5,000 worth of clothes for Vic Starmer. It appears she's chosen to be part of the political scene, or at least reap the benefits of it. So the question is there an official role for a PM's other half? If not, do you think there should be certain duties or expectations, or could they potentially avoid involvement altogether?
Britain's First Lady. Or
exactly right.
Why not? Why shouldn't we have a proper role for the Prime Minister's wife, spouse, partner, whatever? It's so anachronistic that in Britain that does not exist. In America, the First Lady has a full office, a panoply of staff, and they are expected to fulfil a certain kind of role.
Although you could argue that that's the anachronism. That the anachronism is having basically your wife be a hostess, which is what the First Lady job historically was.
Yeah, but I mean, if Kamala Harris wins, we're going to have a First Gentleman who's going to be,
Big Doug.
Yeah. When Hillary Clinton was First Lady and Cherie Blair was over there for a state dinner, there was a press conference in the White House briefing room, this was in 98, I think, beginning of 98. And the White House people asked, so what is Hillary Clinton going to be wearing tonight? And the White House press person goes through this long list of things of exactly who's made it, who's going to be styling the hair, who the shoes are made by. And then someone says, and what about Mrs. Blair? And there was this Downing Street press officer called Maggie Cleaver who says, I haven't got a clue and I wouldn't dream of asking.
Yeah, Mrs. Blair, QC as she was then, KC as she is now. Maybe that's the point, that we quite like our spouses to carry on doing the roles that they're paid to
Although
do.
it ends up being it's impossible because there are certain sort of expectations. This is where this clothing thing has come from.
Exactly.
Right? There is an expectation that kind of like she looks the part. She is like Britain's First Lady, or it would be with a First Gentleman or whatever. But there's no official apparatus or support to achieve it. But it's probably because ultimately, the Prime Minister, unlike the American President, is not the head of state. He's the head of government.
Also,
therefore, you
frankly,
don't get all of the...
Just imagine if your husband
of
suddenly said, I want to be Prime Minister. You're thinking, oh my God, am I going to be sick on my own shoes now? What a dreadful, dreadful role to have to play for the next God knows how long. I bet the last thing she ever wanted to be was the Prime Minister's wife.
I think she handles it very well.
I think she handles
does
it
really
brilliantly.
well, which is basically to try and do almost nothing at all.
Yeah.
That would be the Emily Maitlis approach.
I would not be there. I'd move to a crofter's cottage in the Highlands.
This is supposed to be the pre-intro, by the way, of course.
Welcome to the Newsagents.
Hang on, didn't we miss out one sentence at the end of that particular question from Lauren? Thanks again for your excellent podcast. My dad, Mark, and I are avid listeners. We're both looking forward to seeing John in Harrogate this weekend on his book tour.
Clearly very little going on in Harrogate this weekend.
You managed to do that whole sentence without mentioning the name of your book. Well done. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And let us move on. Hello, newsagents. A lot of talk over the past month or so has been about Sir Keir Starmer not giving enough of an upbeat future for Labour, with his focus instead on the short-term pain. However, if things aren't going to get tangibly better for a while, what could he and his government realistically tell the public without it sounding like more empty platitudes from politicians who promise the world whilst delivering little? That's from Danny in Cheshire.
Yeah, well, I think, obviously this has been the conundrum that's strategically they've faced from the beginning, right? Which is that they've thought that they could easily replicate the sort of George Osborne strategy from 2010 and sort of update it, right for the 2020s. If you talk to Labour people, like they are at the top of the party, they are pretty unapologetic about the whole pessimism thing, and they really bristle at the accusation that they've majored on it for too long, which is fair enough in one sense, right? Which is that, Osborne, the Tories basically did that for between 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's barely been 3 months. there was a genuine argument. There's been a lot of talk this week about the idea of Labour talking the economy down. And of course, consumer sentiment matters, absolutely. Do you remember back in 2010? I mean, there was actually a fragile economic recovery taking hold by the time of the general election of that year. Not only did the government at that time actually dismantle it in terms of sentiment, but they withdrew actual government spending from the economy, which nearly pushed us back into recession. So I can understand why they are angry about it or irritated about this. And they're basically saying that they will continue to talk about the inheritance for as long as it takes. That said, that's fine, as long as Osborne and Cameron did, in fairness to them, they gave a sense of where they were going at the end of it. So you can look backwards as long as you're looking forwards. And I think that the general impression from a lot of Labour MPs is there hasn't been as much looking forwards as there ought to be.
My sense of this goes back to the question that we asked at the party conference, which is about trying to restore trust in politics. And I think Keir is somebody who hates the sound of the populist kind of promise that says it's all going to be fine, stick with me, come with me. It's the Pied Piper of politics that he really loathes. And so I think it's canny on one level, which is that he never wants to be accused of having broken a promise or broken a pledge or said that he's done something that he hasn't managed. And I think it goes back to, my favourite phrase, all trousers, no mouth. He'd prefer to deliver than to talk about it. If he manages to deliver, he will talk about it and he will show whatever we're going to call it, the green shoots, the optimism, the sunlit uplands and all the rest of it. I think he's just very nervous of doing that now, which goes to his character more than anything else.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's incredibly welcome that you're not getting, we're going to spend an extra £350 million.
Boosterism.
Yeah, the boosterism of Johnson, which promised so much and delivered kind of so little in terms of all these new hospitals and everything would be so easy and we'd have all the advantages of being in the European Union while being outside of the European Union.
I mean, call it sunlit uplands or call it basic lies, right?
Yeah,
it was just mistruths.
So I think to have a grown-up conversation with the electorate and say, look, it's going to be tough, but you do have to sketch a vision for the future. And I think that, in a sense, Labour slightly have failed to hold their nerve on this because they saw that was the strategy. They decide, right, we are going to tell people it is going to be pretty grim out there. It's going to be tough. People with the broadest shoulders are going to have to bear the burden and all that sort of stuff. Fine. But then they get a kind of kicking from the media and everyone saying, oh my God, it's so gloom and doom and despondency, and Labour MPs then pick up on it and then they think, oh, we need to change gear a bit and we need to recalibrate this slightly and let's be a bit more optimistic at the party conference about what might be coming.
But since when did the British public need their politicians to be the ones that were sort of cheering them up? I mean, that's not fundamentally the role of government, to just cheer you up.
But in populist terms, that's what they did.
I know, that's what I'm saying. And who wants populism?
Again, I think this
Go and see a movie, read a book, go to a football match. Don't look to your Prime Minister.
I find going to a football match endlessly depressing.
But I suppose but the difference is, right, is that we've had so many years of immiseration in so many ways, right? So it isn't unreasonable maybe for people to look to politics and think things have been so miserable and so bad, and particularly in economic terms for so long, how are we going to get out of it? One of the reasons they didn't hold their nerve is because I think there has been a fundamental illogic at the heart of that strategy, right? Which was when George Osborne, again going back to, if you're trying to repeat a George Osborne type strategy, the thing is about George Osborne's clear message was Labour spent too much money, so we're going to spend less money. Starmer and Reeves have been saying that the Tories spent too much money. There's a £22 billion black hole, which would lead you again to the same conclusion. Well, we need to spend less money. But they don't want to say that we're going to spend less money. They're saying no more austerity.
Exactly.
They're actually looking at the different suite of government public services and saying they need more money. So that illogic, which is at the heart of it, I think is one of the reasons they haven't held their nerve. Because on one level, their fundamental critique,
they don't
of
want
less
to cut
3 months,
public services.
Yeah, it doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah.
I also think that the thing that you said when we were up in Liverpool about the fact that they should have held the budget earlier, because then at least you've got real concrete numbers, you know what's coming, and you can set out your argument more clearly. And at the moment they're sort of setting out the argument in a vacuum because there is the expectation of what's going to come at the end of October, and we just don't know what that is yet.
Danny from Cheshire, are you still with us? Danny's gone
Well, was Danny hoping
now.
for Danny didn't want the 30-second answer. He wanted the full.
He's loved it.
He's listening to the wrong podcast if he's looking for that. Margaret has got a question. It says, what impact do you think that the VAT on private schools will have on the education landscape in the UK? Will state schools just become overwhelmed and private schools end up closing, or do you think this policy is a good idea? I can see both sides of the debate, so we'll be interested to hear your thoughts.
I think it will have virtually no impact on the education landscape. I think it won't raise a huge amount of money. I think it's a totemic move. I think it does something that speaks to fairness, which is why would you give people that can afford it a loophole? And I think that there is a lot of noise about this policy from the right-leaning papers who probably have vested interest in keeping the public and private schools happy. And I think it's going to be one of those policies that once it's underway, people will just get on with it.
Yes,
I just don't think it will be even remembered in 2 years' time.
Or in 4 years' time, would you have a Conservative manifesto promising to reverse it? I bet they wouldn't. Because it's
Depends how much money it brings in.
It's so anomalous that that private schools have charitable status, which is what they had, and that is why they were exempt from VAT.
I think they still have the charitable status is a different thing, because charitable status helps some of the really wealthy schools pick up some of the less well-off schools, and actually they do. I mean, depending on how benevolent they're feeling, they can make a real difference to the wealthy schools. To some of the other ones, that status is still staying. The VAT loophole, I mean, is an anomaly.
And I can't help thinking that a lot of these private schools, they're going to have to look at budgets and they're going to have to readjust. But I think that what you're not going to see is the day after that it's introduced, schools putting up their fees by 20% for all parents. I'm sure they're going to absorb a lot of the costs.
I bet they're not. I bet they're not, and I bet that the parents or the families will be absolutely furious, and then they'll make their decision. And the ones that will want to carry on with private education will do it, and the ones that think, "Am I getting a particularly good deal here?" will move. I mean, but I don't think it will have a massively radical impact.
I think one thing you can say surprising is that they have brought in the change in year. So I think there was some surprise that, normally if you were doing a change like this, you might say from the next financial year to give a little bit of time to plan. They brought it in mid-year, which obviously you can argue that parents didn't know that was going to happen when they enrolled, etc. I think in terms
it's red meat. I mean, it's like fox hunting.
It polls very well.
I think it's 2024 fox hunting.
It polls very well. It polls very well, and I think there is a sort of fundamental sort of fairness argument for that, which is I do find one of the arguments around this when people say things like, well, we won't be able to afford it if they do this. Well, I mean, that's like saying that, I could afford a Lamborghini if only the government didn't charge VAT on it. I mean, unfortunately, the sales VAT is part of government policy. That most things that we buy have VAT on it. Historically, we haven't done so on private education. That's a change, but I can see why it polls well, because basically you're making an argument for a tax break on a luxury good. In terms of the effect it will have on the education system, I think, Emily, you're right in a sense it won't have much effect, because you're talking about quite small numbers. And actually something that people forget with this, sometimes you get the argument of, well, state schools will be overwhelmed. There are lots of state schools closing because of the rapid decline in rolls, because people are having fewer kids because they can't afford it.
I mean, London, the number of primary schools is really dwindling. It's extraordinary.
Which has an effect on the local community.
I suppose the other thing is that, I'm interested in whether it will raise the money that
it will raise some money.
It will raise some money, but it's like the tax on non-doms, which is, the problem Labour got themselves into, where they ruled out so many tax increases, on VAT, on national insurance, on income tax and the like, on corporation tax. That leaves them limited room for manoeuvre. And, The Guardian reporting that even the tax on non-doms is going to raise possibly next to nothing.
See, what Italy has, I was talking to wealth creators at the weekend. And
you were talking to wealth creators?
Yes.
Do they rub two sticks together and create wealth?
It's amazing what they do. It's just wonderful to watch.
Weekends at Shea Maitlis really are something.
From wealth creators up to the Labour Party conference.
I wasn't in my own house, sadly. But the Italy model is something they think that the government should introduce here, which is for non-doms, you pay a sort of flat rate, £200,000, which sounds a huge extravagance until you realise how much some of these people, earn. And for that money, in Italy, this is the Italian way of doing things, you get to basically reside and invest and, be part of the sort of Italian society, as it were. But they won't do it here. And that kind of thing would probably draw in lots of investment on a very sort of simple flat rate.
There is one more reason as to why. I mean, I remember Blair considering this change on VAT in private schools in the late 90s. And there was a reason they decided not to do it, looked at it, decided not to do it, thought it wasn't worth the political pain for the money that it raised. One of the reasons, I mean, this has been a bit politically difficult for the Labour Party now. One of the reasons it's less politically difficult than it would have been in the late 90s is because the private sector has become more exclusive than it was in the late 90s.
So fewer Labour cabinet members?
Well, fewer cabinet members, but more that like fewer kind of British, what you might say, I don't know, upper middle classes have sent their kids to private schools because they have become much more expensive over the last 20 years as they have opened their doors increasingly to the children of very, very rich foreigners more and more. So their prices have gone up way above inflation.
So it feels like it's a non-dom tax as much as anything.
Well, exactly. So it just ends up being less politically painful than it might have been, say, 20 years ago.
And also Blair did fox hunting.
Blair did do fox hunting, yes.
High news agents enjoyed your coverage from the Labour conference this week, wondering how the Conservative Party conference will work with no clear leader. You and us both, Paul. Does Rishi do the headline speech? What can we expect? We are going like little moles blindly to Birmingham this weekend, not really knowing what to expect either, right?
Bizarre. No.
Leaderless, rudderless. Who do they cheer
Quite
for?
Exciting.
I mean, interesting.
Anarchy in the Conservative Party.
Oh, come on. Nothing will compare to the anarchy we had of Liz Truss's party conference. That was great.
Yeah, they'd quite like not to have a leader at that point.
Yeah.
And in fact, shortly afterwards, they didn't.
So broadly, we know that Rishi isn't doing the leader's speech.
Yeah, which is really weird.
Which has taken it down a day, so nothing on Wednesday. We know that the people who are standing, who's left now? Cleverly,
Tugendhat,
Badenoch, and Jenrick. So there's 4 of them, and I think do they each get a speech?
They each get a speech, but apparently it's only like 10 minutes. She's
brilliant.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, in one way.
Set out a template that you will
don't you wish that Scylla
repeated.
was still alive and they could just turn it into blind date?
I always wish that Scylla was still alive. I was talking about this just the other night.
What's your name and where'd you come from?
Oh, a famous Conservative Scylla.
She was, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
she was
But
there.
wrong city. That should have been in Liverpool. Really.
Yeah.
So look, have we clarified that for you, Paul? We don't really know. We're quite excited. We'll bring you everything as it happens. I mean, the bigger question, I suppose, is not just the format of events, but who shows up. Because everyone that you think of going to Tory party conference won't be there. They're not MPs.
Does Rishi Sunak turn up?
Of course.
He'll be there, but not make. I mean, they're really.
So he'll be there, but not making a speech.
So the most similar conference
Hunt has to be there because he is still
He's
the
Shadow
Chancellor.
Chancellor.
Yeah, the shadow
Sunak
cabinet
has
is still
to be
making
there.
speeches, but with no leader, which is.
But
bizarre.
also, I can't remember a Tory conference without Jacob Rees-Mogg. You know.
Oh.
Right?
I think we'll survive.
We'll survive
I
somehow.
know, but
We'll
I'm just
get
saying,
through.
there are so many. Every time you think of somebody, Penny Morgan.
He'll be there
No.
for GB News.
Oh, maybe.
He
I
will.
mean, how many of the former living Conservative Prime Ministers, of whom there are 6,
None.
will be there?
None.
None. But I suppose that's not so unusual. Former Prime Ministers don't.
Former Prime Ministers don't really love.
May while she was still an MP, but I doubt. May, I don't know. She loves the Tory party so much she might do some random fringe on, sort of bin.
Well, hasn't Boris got a
No,
to
actually,
sell?
her big thing is slavery, modern day slavery.
Well,
so
yeah, she could do that.
hats off to her. She does go and do a fringe on that.
I mean, look, the most similar conference that I suppose it would be like is the famous Tory one of 2005, where David Cameron emerged as leader. It was a very similar setup, and this conference has basically been inspired by that, hoping someone would emerge like Cameron over a kind of long campaign. Difference then is that Michael Howard still made a speech. He was the leader at the time. The party felt like it was on the way up rather than just having been sort of trounced again. I mean, they didn't do well in the election in 2005, but it felt like they were on the right trajectory. So the kind of grammar of it and how it works, it's going to be almost unique, I think.
And also
Stay
the
with
other
us,
thing,
Paul.
Yeah. The other thing about the Tory party conference is they normally know who they've got to cheer for. And so, when Rishi Sunak kind of made his speech, they cheered for him. When it was Liz Truss, they cheered for her. The Tories like to get behind their leader, at least at the conference. Yeah. Who do they get behind? I mean, it's going to be a really odd occasion.
That's what we will be measuring the clapometer, in essence.
I mean,
we will see when we go round, are people there Kemi people? Are they Jenrick people? Are they Tom people? Cleverly people?
Given that the membership is so small, and given that a decent tranche of them will be there, it is a genuinely great opportunity for the leaders, or the wannabe leaders, to actually meet the electorate and try and win their vote. So it will be, I mean, the interesting thing for me is to what extent does it become bitter or does it stuck? So far it's been a pretty low-key contest. They haven't really had a go at each other. Is there any sense that this starts to go on a turn
So
next
I was
week?
talking to a pollster, our fave pollster, Luke Trill, last week, who said what the Conservatives don't realise is that if they actually want to topple Keir, anytime soon, Tom Tugendhat is by far and away their best chance. But they will never elect Tom Tugendhat because they're not thinking like that. They will only go with the person that they see as,
part of ideological purity. And
or the enforcer, or the person that can sort of bash him around a bit.
Although I have to say, some of his judgment sometimes is a bit odd. They were all asked at a hustings last night, all four of them, the famous Theresa May question, what's the naughtiest thing you've ever done? Most of them flannelled. You know what Tugendhat said? He said, I invaded a country. I was part of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Like, not exactly a laugh a minute, Double T. I mean, honestly.
I think that's quite interesting.
Do you?
Yes, I do, because he's both reminding everyone of his military record and saying, we don't agree with the decision
pretty
anymore.
Poor taste myself, but anyway.
Naughty.
Naughty.
Oh, you naughty little war
naughty
criminal.
thing.
You've done it
You just
again.
illegally invaded a country. You absolute cad.
Oh, honestly, I've talked about that before. Right, we're back.
After the break. We're back with Pippa. And she asked this question. Kamala Harris really asserted her middle-class roots during her speech. Is the American middle class the equivalent of our working class? As it seems strange for me to hear a politician bragging about being middle class. Be interesting to have an insight into how our class systems compare. Really love the show. Always look forward to it after my dinner.
So
Thank you,
yes,
Pippa.
you're absolutely right, Pippa, that when Americans say middle class, we would say working class. But I do have a bit of a problem with that weird Kamala Harris video where she talks about the fact that she was really middle class, working class, because she worked at McDonald's when she was a student. Like, everyone I know has worked at McDonald's. I mean, well, maybe not you, but anyway,
They
everyone I
wouldn't have
know has
wanted
worked in something like McDonald's. I don't think having a sort of part-time job as a student or as a young person makes you understand the trials and tribulations of working families. I think that's absolute rubbish.
Said she became working class when she was
Yeah,
16.
exactly.
She worked at McDonald's because she worked at McDonald's.
Oh, okay. Just leave McDonald's alone. We can all
I was
get
a
jobs at
petrol
McDonald's.
pump attendant when I was 18.
I was a hairdresser.
Bet it was a nice salon though.
It was a beautiful salon,
Yeah,
and I
there you
got
go.
paid £6 a day as a
£6
Saturday
day.
girl.
Sweeping up the hair, sweeping up the locks.
I like to think I did a bit of highlighting.
Did you?
Terrible. I was a
But you do a lot
terrible
of that in your
hairdresser.
journalistic
I
career
know.
now, to
Do
be
you
fair.
think we may have just
Scream,
strayed from
yes.
Pippa's question a tiny bit?
Anyway,
Look, but there is a huge difference over class in America compared to class in the UK. And, it's the old line about when you hear someone open their mouth. In the UK, you pretty much know what sort of education they've had, on the poshness of their voice and all the rest of it. I don't think that applies in the US in anything like the same extent. It's not that sort of class status thing. If you've got money, you're doing well and people kind of revere you and kind of you're seen to have done good because you've made a load of money. There is not the same kind of, it's not freighted
There was no
with the same
word
issues.
cloud above Donald Trump's head saying, rich, as
Yeah.
there was above
Rishi
Rishi
Sunak.
Sunak.
No,
Exactly.
completely opposite. But also in Britain, the term middle class is also a bit of a synonym for bourgeois. Like there's a cultural connotation to it that's like there's something slightly narrow about it, something a bit Basil Fawlty about it. Parading around saying I'm middle class.
I've
in
never
Britain,
heard anyone do
No
that.
one
No.
would ever do that.
It's probably
because-
a Spectator column, to be honest.
Yeah,
That's where you would find the loving.
Exactly, yeah,
we're all
yeah,
middle
exactly.
class. Should we admit it
Yes,
now? But
yes.
but nobody says that.
I
as
love
a-
the Saturday Times magazine.
I love my second latte.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like no one would because it has those sort of slightly. There's more sort of bourgeois connotation.
But I think
that's
we
why.
judge people much more on class in the UK than people do in America. I don't think they're trying to. You meet somebody and you're kind of already guessing what sort of university, what sort of education.
But that's
what
also
sort-
because they have the racial element as well in a way that is not as strong. That like class and race are more closely associated
Yeah.
than they would be here.
Yep, that I would say that is a fair point. Yeah,
I think fundamentally we don't really approve of those that govern us being rich in this country, and fundamentally in America they really do.
because also money plays such a much bigger role in American politics that you have to have money almost to kind of be competitive. You have to know rich people who are going to dip in and pay fortunes up front because that's the only way you can run a campaign.
Lord Ali,
Yes, Lord
with that exception. Question from Richard: why is Trump not doing a second presidential TV debate with Kamala Harris before the election? It might have something to do with the fact that he
got
roundly
his-
lost the first one, Richard.
Well, he lost the first one badly. I think the other calculation why he's not doing a second debate is that I still think, and it might seem remarkable to say it, that there is a lack of name recognition and knowledge about Kamala Harris compared to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump doesn't want to give her the platform to be up there, because what Americans saw in the first debate was, oh, they really liked her, and her approval ratings have gone soaring upwards. I mean, it may not have manifested itself yet into opinion poll ratings, but likability, approval ratings, way up on when she was the vice president as a result of this.
I think it's even simpler than that. He doesn't think he's behind. And actually, the person who always asks for the debate, traditionally, is the person who has the most to gain.
What's he got to gain at this point from it?
Well,
Almost
I say he doesn't think he's behind. He's not. You know, they're tied neck and neck.
Yeah.
And so he sounded ridiculous on that debate stage. But if we all remember one thing, and if they've capitalised on one thing, it's those poor little pets in Springfield, which has now become the sort of salient immigration issue of the whole campaign. And he's doubled down on that. So he probably thinks, on one weird level, job done. I've raised immigration. He's 11 points ahead on the economy. And they're absolutely tied in a dead heat in many of these real knife-edge places. So he might just be thinking, I don't want to go on stage and say anything stupid, because frankly I don't have to.
And his team will be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
There's no way. He's so uncontrolled in the last one. Wouldn't do what they said. They're not going to be saying, Mr. President, I think what we should do.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Have another go.
What's so interesting about this presidential campaign compared to others? Because we had the disastrous debate early with Biden, and then we had the debate with Harris. What are the moments in the campaign now? It's just going to be rallies. It just feels. What are the themes? What's emerging? What is new in the US election campaign? It's really interesting, because I'm thinking, what's the big subject for this week, or next week, or the week after?
But that point about them being early is the thing that is really important and interesting, right? In the sense that every other presidential election, while presidential debates have been a thing basically since the 80s, have been run and organised by the Commission on Presidential Debates, and for various reasons which we don't need to get into, that hasn't happened this time. They basically, Trump campaign refused to
have anything to do with them.
Whereas normally we would have known that there would have been 3 debates which normally take place in September or October. We know when the dates are. They agree early. There's no getting out of them. There's no getting around them. Whereas this time, one of the weirdnesses of this campaign, many weirdnesses, is that actually it has been up for grabs week by week. Will they do any more? With whom? When? It's all no one really knows. So it's a sort of peculiarity of this particular campaign.
Okay, Lewis, you do Kip. This is a great
All right,
question.
this is from Kip. Hi, newsagents. Thanks for all your hard work on the podcast. I'm a big fan. My question is inspired by last Friday's episode with Mark Urban, who told the story of when he missed the chance to interview Osama bin Laden in 1998. I think it was like 2000. I think it was even worse than that. It was like 9 months before 9/11. Yeah. I was wondering if each of you could tell us about the biggest missed opportunities or the biggest regrets of your journalistic careers while doing this for a start. Obviously, it's got to be right.
Who are the terrorists we failed to interview when we had the chance?
How could this possibly go wrong?
No.
This conversation. Jesus.
Well, I will say this, that I was presenting the Today programme way a long time ago, and sitting next to me in the studio was the Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic, who was convicted of a life sentence at The Hague, now locked up in prison, never will see the light of day again.
One of your co-presenters. There's no way to talk about Justin Wade, John, honestly. Very rude.
And you're sitting there,
Bonnet.
and you're sitting there thinking, oh, Mr. Karadzic, thank you so much for coming into the studio. It was the London-Bosnia peace talks. I think David Owen was very closely involved in it.
Wait, was this before? Was this when it was still Yugoslavia?
No, this was when the breakup of Yugoslavia.
70s, Emily. Not that
Oh, for God's sake, you're not going back to Marshal Tito.
I was going to say, he sat next to Tito, was he?
Yeah, exactly.
General, lovely to see you.
You just think Tito's a vodka. I think Tito is a marshal in Yugoslavia.
Okay, well, I didn't sit next to a
genocidal
war criminal, but I did have the chance to host a lovely sort of cosy chat with Biden. And I said no.
Yeah.
You said no?
Well, I was just working.
When?
I was doing Newsnight. It was so it must have been in that gap between, I'm just trying to think, it must have been about 2017?
So he left being vice
2018.
president.
So he wasn't vice president, and he hadn't yet stood the presidency.
And he's done.
And he was coming to London, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to, but I am doing Newsnight. And it just seemed at that time that, took a lot to sort of push
I'd
me off
love
a
to.
shift.
I'd love to, Joe, but-
I'd love to. And so it was like, oh, he could be the next president. I was like, I don't think so. He looks a bit old.
Whenever you
Sure
hear
enough,
Emily
he
Maitlis
was.
say, "Oh, I'd love to come to your lunch.
No,
I'd
no.
love to come to your
No.
dinner," you know
This was a real love to.
What a
I
wonderful
also
idea.
had the chance to go to dinner with Bill Gates.
And
Well, again, I was doing Newsnight. I mean, one of
I've
the
had
reasons.
dinner with Bill Gates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No,
Yeah, but
this
you
has
weren't
just
presenting
become-
Newsnight. That's
Yeah,
just become
exactly.
one up. This is
This is just about one.
anyone
of
else
my
had any dinner with anybody recently?
Anyone else have any
Yeah.
regrets? Did you have any regrets that you flew too often on a private jet?
God, no wonder they hate us.
Come on,
Can't
Lewis,
blame
what
it, my
about
head.
you?
I don't have any regrets, John. I always call it right, so I can't recall any in particular.
On that
Apart
bombshell.
from about 2 years ago when you're like, yeah, quite doing this podcast.
Do you want to come and give up your promising broadcasting career and do a podcast?
Oh well, never mind. Here we are.
We started this episode, as we do, with an attack on our production team, and so we thought we'd end.
Not unusually.
Not unusually. We thought we'd end with another insight into our production team. We want to tell you about Shane.
You think this is going to be a heartwarming anecdote of how incredible they are and how they make us who we are? Because those are the kind of speeches that presenters normally give about their production team.
If anyone
couldn't have
thinks
done it
that,
without you.
they're listening to the
This
wrong
one
show.
is different. Tell us about Shane.
So Shane is going to some do tonight, and he had to iron his suit, except he hasn't got an iron. So what did he do?
We can see it.
He heated up the frying pan in
If
his
you're
house.
watching this rather than listening to it, you'll be able to actually currently see it. The rest of the production crew, who actually are as vindictive and malicious as we are, have actually got it up on the screen in front of us.
And so
of Shane this morning.
He's ironing his trousers. He's ironing his kecks for
With a
his
frying
posh
pan.
night out. And, well, at least it's a nice posh non-stick frying pan. I kind of had it as an old-fashioned skillet that he would have
So
had.
at least the frying pan isn't now stuck to the trousers.
By the way, Shane is a guy. This is another thing about Shane. This is a guy who actually lies about what he does when he goes back to Ireland. Do you know this? Because he doesn't want
Doesn't want to
people
tell
think-
anyone he's
he doesn't
on the
want. Well, he
podcast.
says it's because he doesn't want people to think he's getting a bit too big for himself. So he says he works in a pub. And back in Ireland, they say that's a great honest job. Well done, Shane.
Well done, Shane.
So there you go. But if you know what, all you need to do, Shane, is just show him that picture of you half naked, ironing your own trousers with a small Argos frying pan, and I don't think anyone will think that there's any danger whatsoever of you getting too big for your boots. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.